Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Just a couple of brief comments off the top before I'd be happy to take questions. So number one, everybody in Ontario knows that this is the first day of the April break, the belated March break. And so a couple of million students from publicly funded schools across Ontario are home this week. And we know that education workers in every corner of this province are also waiting for additional information about the vaccine rollout. Now, for a number of days, for weeks, in fact, I and others have been calling on Doug Ford and his government to expedite the rollout of vaccines and to prioritize them by way of a vaccine blitz for frontline education workers, for teachers, principals, custodians, school bus drivers, education assistants, every single woman and man who works on the front lines of education right across Ontario. And the reason is simple. The reason is because as a politician, but also as a father of two daughters who attend an elementary school here in York Region, I don't want the schools of this province to have to close again at any point for the balance of this pandemic. It has been such a stressful year for parents, for kids, and again, for everybody working on the front lines. So we've known for weeks that Doug Ford has the vaccine supply to be able to conduct this kind of vaccine blitz. A number of days ago, I and others called on him urgently to do so. We know that last week he started to take the first few, I'll say, timid steps in the right direction, but it's not enough. There are still several days in this April break. And so I am urging Doug Ford to do the right thing and to make sure that the tens of thousands of frontline education workers in this province have the chance to get the vaccine this week so that when we get to next week, schools right across Ontario can remain open. We all want kids to stay at school, to be in school. I want my kids to be in school, but I need them to be healthy. I need to have the peace of mind knowing that they will be healthy and safe. And certainly all of our frontline education workers deserve that same peace of mind. So today I'm urging Doug Ford, do the right thing, conduct the vaccine blitz in schools right across this province to make sure they stay open, that we don't have any other interruptions for the balance of the school year. It's what the kids need, it's what their parents need, and it's what our system needs. And the second thing I just wanted to highlight today, based on some media reports that we saw earlier this morning, I am urging Doug Ford to come forward and explain the rationale for how certain postal codes were included in the rollout or the targeting of vaccines being rolled up, being moved up or prioritized in this process. Again, we see in media reports this morning that there were up to 7 postal codes that in fact don't seem to be in so-called hot zones that were included, that were not included, I should say, in the prioritization by Doug Ford's government. So I would urge him today to clear the air and make it quite understandable for people what the rationale was for how the postal codes were selected, so we can make sure that there is not even a simple perception that politics or partisanship got in the way of public health decision-making. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Okay, first question is Laura Stone from the Globe and Mail.
Hi, Stephen. So I'm wondering, the Premier has a press conference today with the Education Minister. We don't know exactly what he's announcing, but so in your estimation, can schools only stay open if all teachers are vaccinated this week? And how realistic do you think that really is?
Well, a couple of things to keep in mind, and I said this last week on the same topic. Public health leaders in each of the different public health units across the province, I think, would know best about what schools should or shouldn't be doing in their local areas. We saw this last week, for example, in Peel, when Dr. Lowe made the decision to close schools there ahead of the April break. So I would defer to what local public health leaders think should be the case in each of their zones or each of their regions. But I also know that the single greatest insurance policy that we have as a province guarding against this notion of schools continuing to close, whether across the board, right across a region, or because there's been an outbreak in a particular school, the single greatest weapon that we have at our disposal is to expedite the vaccine rollout. And so this is why it is unfathomable to me that Doug Ford weeks ago did not put in place a plan to do the vaccine blitz that I and others have been calling for. So it's never too late to do the right thing. Yes, I know we're already into the April break, and it would take quite an effort to start the process in a more urgent way. But I know how much power a premier leading a majority government has in our province. If Doug Ford gave the order today I am convinced that before the end of the April break, we could start the vaccine blitz and have it done as soon as possible. Now, would that necessarily be done completely this week? Perhaps not, but you got to start in order to make it happen. And that's why I'm calling on him to do so.
Follow up?
Do you think that schools should return next week, or should the province close all schools should the government close all schools in the province before they return?
Yeah. No, listen, I've been saying this consistently. I want schools to stay open. I want my daughters to be able to go back to school on Monday. I don't know a single parent whose preference under perfect circumstances or good circumstances is for their kid to be doing the remote learning. It's not ideal for anybody in the system, but parents want their kids to be safe and to be healthy. We want that peace of mind. Frontline education workers want the same thing. And so this is why now, for days, in fact, for weeks, so many people have been saying to Doug Ford, you've got the supply. In theory, you should have the infrastructure in place. Why aren't you putting frontline education workers into, and not just here and there, not just in so-called hot zones, but across the board? Why aren't you making them an urgent priority if you truly believe schools should stay open? Every time I see a letter or a tweet or some form of correspondence from Doug Ford or his education minister on this topic, they give us a whole bunch of statistics. And Doug Ford did this at length just a few days ago, 90% this, 95% this. That tells me he's not talking to a real person. He's not talking to parents out there. He's not talking to frontline education workers, and neither is his education minister. Because as a parent, I don't want you to throw stats at me when my daughter's school had to close last week because of an outbreak, and it did. I don't want this to be this game where they're making the claim that everything's fine when parents out there right across Ontario don't feel good, particularly in places like York, Peel, and Toronto, and elsewhere. They don't feel good about the decision that they have to make. So I want schools to stay open, but to make that a reality, we need Doug Ford to step up and to urgently vaccinate frontline education workers right across Ontario. He should have planned for this weeks ago. He should be doing it urgently right now.
Okay, a reminder, if you have any questions, please write to the chat or raise your hand using the Zoom function. Okay, since there's no other questions on the line, Laura Stone from the Globe and Mail has another question.
Sure.
It's a one-on-one, Stephen. So on the hotspot plan, I mean, you mentioned off the top, you're referring to the CBC story about certain postal codes not having as high infection rate. What's your understanding of how that was chosen? I mean, this was released by the vaccine task force. So is there anything to suggest that there's any political interference here?
No, and that's why I'm not here today to make an accusation about that. That's why I simply called on Doug Ford to clear the air today and to come out very transparently, or have someone else do that, whether it's Christine Elliott or someone else come out, just so that we can all have that peace of mind to know that politics did not play a role. I want to believe the best in people, so I'm going to make the presumption that there was some kind of science behind the decision. But I did see the media report and the CBC as you referenced, and I am concerned. So I hope Doug Ford clears the air today.
Laura, I'm not sure if you have a follow-up, but this will be the last question.
Yeah, just in general regarding the hotspot vaccinations, you mentioned they should do teachers in hotspots. They say they're going to do that in Toronto and Peel. We've heard that they're going to do adults in hotspots, but we don't really know how that's supposed to work. In general, how do you find the communications of how people in these hotspots postal codes are supposed to be getting vaccinated right now?
It's been just as confusing and incoherent as everything else that Doug Ford's been doing now for a number of months. And I don't know why he hasn't learned the lesson about the importance of clear communications. It's just people out there don't really have a clue. There are multiple websites and portals people need to go to or have access to. It's confusing. I've done this for my own parents. I've done it for, I've tried to help some others. My wife and I now, technically, we live in a hot spot in our postal code here in York Region. So we tried to navigate the system with, varying degrees of success. So look, I know it's a really big undertaking, but I would have thought 13 or 14 months into this pandemic that we would kind of have a bit more of a well-oiled machine in this regard, and we don't. And so that's really concerning. And yes, I did call for education workers in hot zones, but I just want to stress education workers and essential workers in other industries, not just in hot zones, but right across Ontario, from my perspective, should be part of the vaccine blitz. With Doug Ford, it always seems that it's a bit of a half-hearted half measure. We're always lagging behind. It's like he's always dragged kicking and screaming to making the right decision and then communicating it clearly. And I think that's one of the reasons that we're in the tough situation that we're in right now.
Okay, thank you, everyone. That concludes today's press conference.
Thanks, everyone.